The night on Okinawa feels alive, like the island is breathing smoke and fear. The air is thick with burned powder, and every few seconds the darkness rips open with a flare that turns everything white. Sharp rocks, broken gear, and men pressed flat against the ground. Up on the ridge, the limestone is jagged and cruel under your knees. Below the cliff, waves crash against the shore, like nothing is happening at all. And somewhere in that chaos, you hear it. A weak voice calling out for a medic, then another, fading in and out under gunfire. And then you see something that doesn't make sense. A man is moving forward instead of back, crawling toward the wounded instead of away from them. His hands are empty, no rifle, no pistol, nothing. Just a medical bag swinging at his side. In a battle where every soldier grips a weapon like it's their last lifeline, this man is unarmed. You can almost feel your stomach tighten as he disappears into smoke and tracer fire because you know what should happen to him. But he keeps going anyway. His name is Desmond Doss, Private First Class, U.S. Army combat medic. And before this battle, many of the men around him mocked him. Doss didn't fit the image of a World War II infantryman. In training, he refused to carry a weapon, not because he wanted to escape danger, but because he believed he couldn't take a life. In a rifle company, that choice made him an instant target. Some soldiers saw him as dead weight. Others thought he was a coward. A few even wanted him removed, convinced he would get someone killed when it mattered most. The insults weren't quiet either. They were constant. Cold looks, angry jokes, men who believed that without a rifle, he didn't belong beside them. But Doss never left. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He stayed. He took the pressure and kept showing up like he had something to prove, even if no one asked him to. He trained as a medic because that was the one way he could serve fully without carrying a weapon. And being a combat medic is not the safe job people imagine. A medic runs toward the worst part of the fight. He crawls through open ground when bullets are flying. He kneels beside men who are bleeding out while explosions shake the earth. He works with his hands while death hunts him from every direction. By 1945, Doss had already been under fire in the Pacific. But Okinawa was different. Okinawa was a grinder. The battle began on April 1st, 1945, and it became one of the most savage fights of the entire war. The island was close enough to Japan to matter for the next stage of the war, and the Japanese defenses were built to break the American advance with maximum bloodshed. The terrain was brutal: caves, ridges, hidden positions, mortar fire that seemed to come from nowhere, and rain that turned the ground into mud. One place stood out like a nightmare that had its own name: the Maida Escarpment. To the Americans, it became Hacksaw Ridge. It wasn't a mountain, but it didn't need to be. It was a steep cliff of rock and coral that forced soldiers to climb straight up into enemy fire. The Americans used cargo nets to scale it, hands slipping on rope, boots scraping stone, hearts pounding because they knew what waited at the top. Japanese machine guns, mortars, and riflemen were dug in, with caves and trenches that made them hard to destroy and easy to hide. When the 77th Infantry Division attacked this area, Doss went with them, not behind them, not waiting at the bottom. He climbed the ridge too, with his medical bag and his calm focus, stepping into the same danger every rifleman faced. At first, the assault looked like it might hold. The Americans reached the top and began fighting across the ridgeline, firing into trenches, throwing grenades into cave mouths, trying to push the Japanese back. Smoke drifted across the ground, and the world shrank down to whatever you could see a few feet ahead. Then the ridge erupted. Japanese artillery and mortars slammed the position. Machine gun fire ripped across open ground. Men dropped where they stood. Others crawled, dragging broken legs and soaked uniforms, leaving dark trails behind them. The ridge became a blur of screaming, shattered rock and confused orders that no one could hear. In minutes, the Americans were forced back toward the cliff edge. And that's when it happened. The moment that separated Desmond Doss from almost everyone else on that ridge. As soldiers retreated down the escarpment, wounded men were left behind on top, not because anyone wanted to abandon them, but because there was no safe way to reach them. The ridge was a killing zone. Any movement drew fire. Carrying a wounded man was almost impossible under that storm of bullets. But Doss stayed up there. He stayed on the ridge while others pulled back. You can almost feel what that decision costs, the sick fear that rises in your throat when you realize you're alone, the sound of enemy fire getting closer, the temptation to run, to slide down the net, to survive. But Doss ignored it all because the voices of wounded men were still calling out in the dark. He crawled toward them. One soldier was slumped in a crater, barely conscious. Doss treated him quickly, hands working with speed and control. Another was bleeding badly, eyes wide with panic. Doss bandaged him, kept him alive, then dragged him through jagged rock toward the cliff edge. Another man lay still, and for a second, Doss thought he was too late, until he saw the faint rise of a chest. Again and again, Doss moved through smoke to find anyone still breathing. Then he faced the hardest part, getting them down. The escarpment was a cliff. A wounded man couldn't climb down a cargo net alone, and carrying someone down under fire would get both men killed. So Doss used rope and pure determination. He tied wounded soldiers into a harness, guided them to the edge, and lowered them down the cliff one by one, controlling their weight with shaking arms and raw hands. Picture it clearly. A man dangling in the air, a rope sliding fast through burning palms, the medic bracing his boots against rock while bullets crack nearby. And after one man reached the bottom, the medic didn't stop. He went back up into the smoke, again and again. Men below the cliff started seeing bodies come down from the ridge. Living bodies, wounded but alive. Soldiers who should have been lost forever were being returned. It didn't feel real. It felt like the ridge was releasing men it had already claimed. Someone asked the question that didn't make sense. Who is doing this? And the answer spread quickly, almost like a rumor nobody wanted to believe. It was Doss, the unarmed medic, the one they mocked, the one they doubted, the one they thought wouldn't stand firm under fire. He was up there alone, pulling men out of hell. Later estimates said he saved around 75 men during that brutal action on Hacksaw Ridge. The exact number may never be perfect, but the truth doesn't change. He saved far more than anyone thought possible, while carrying no weapon at all. When morning finally came, the ridge looked like a scar ripped into the earth. Smoke drifted over craters. The ground was littered with torn equipment and the still forms of men who didn't make it. It wasn't a victory scene. It was survival. But among the soldiers who lived, something had changed. No one laughed at Doss anymore, because mockery doesn't survive proof like that. Doss kept serving after that night. He stayed with his unit, kept running toward wounded men under fire, kept pushing himself past exhaustion. Okinawa was relentless, and it eventually caught him too. He was wounded by a grenade blast, then later hit again, his left arm shattered by a bullet. Even then, he tried to keep helping until he physically couldn't. He was evacuated on May 21st, 1945, leaving behind a ridge that had taken so many lives, but not the ones he refused to give up on. Desmond Doss later received the Medal of Honor for his actions on Okinawa. But the medal isn't the most powerful part of this story. The most powerful part is the moment those soldiers understood what real courage looks like. Not loud courage, not violent courage, but quiet, stubborn courage, the kind that crawls forward when everyone else must retreat, the kind that hears a voice in the dark and refuses to let it go silent. And if you imagine that ridge one last time, the flares, the smoke, the cliff edge, the rope cutting into skin, you can almost hear the thought that kept Desmond Doss moving when any normal man would have stopped. Just one more man, one more trip, one more life. That is why they mocked him at first.